Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Today, me and my friends will explain about the differences between types of International Standard Organizations, ISO, which is ISO 40001, ISO 9001, and ISO 45001 starting from class 5 to class 10. Before that, I'm going to introduce my group members which present the class 4 starting from Nur Syahada Humaira and continue by me, Nur Najwa, and then Nur Izzatul Natasha, Nur Ain Shahira, Siti Fairuz, and lastly class 10 by Adli Shahira. Now, let me tell you the details all of the ISO. The first one is ISO 40001. ISO 40001 is the international standard that specifies requirements for an effective environmental management system, EMS. It provides a framework that an organization can follow rather than establishing environmental performance requirements. Next is ISO 9001. This ISO is the International Standard for Quality Management System, QMS. To elaborate, a company must follow the requirements set forth in the ISO 9001 standard in order to be certified. The standard used to demonstrate their organization's ability to consistently provide products and services. It can meet customer and regulatory requirements and to demonstrate continuous improvement. And lastly is ISO 45001 is the new standard for occupational health and safety, OH&HAS, to provide a safe and healthy workplace for employees and visitors is their main responsibility.
Class 4 is the context of the organization. There are 4 sub-clauses. The first sub-clause is the understanding the organization and its context. The differences, the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that will affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its environmental management systems in ISO 14001, including all environmental conditions that are currently or capable of affecting the organization, while affect its ability to achieve the quality management system's intended results in ISO 901 and OH&S management system in ISO 45001. The similarity for each ISO, which is ISO 14001, ISO 901 and ISO 45001, is to determine the external and internal issues that may give the effects its ability to achieve the intended outcomes or results. For the second subclause is understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. In ISO 14001, the organization need to determine interested parties that relevant to environmental management system. The relevant needs and expectations of these interested parties become its compliance obligations. Besides, the requirements of these interested parties in ISO 901 that are relevant to quality management system. The other interested parties, in addition to workers that are relevant to the OH&S management system, the relevant needs and expectations of workers or could become legal and other requirements. The next subclause, third subclause 4, is about determining the environmental management system, the quality management system, and OH&S management system. The similarity of this each ISO is the organization need to determine the external and internal issues referred to 4.1, and the requirement of relevant interested parties referred to 4.2. Moreover, the differences all of this ISO, the organization shall determine the boundaries and applicability to establish this scope. There are a few things that needs to be considered, such as its authority and ability to control and influence others for EMS, the products and service of the organization for QMS and for OH&S management system is considered the plan or perform work-related activities. Finally, what the organization should do to achieve the intended outcomes. Generally, the organization shall establish implement, maintain and continually improve all these management systems, including the process needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. There is some addition for ISO 900-1 proposed. The organization need to determine the inputs required and outputs expected, sequence and interaction of these processes. Other than that, this organization also should to maintain documented information to support the operation of its processes and retain documented information to have confidence that the processes being carried out is planned.
Next, I will present about Clause 5. Clause 5 is leadership. It has three main points, which is leadership and commitment, organizational policy and organizational roles, responsibilities and authorities. For leadership and commitment, the top management should demonstrate leadership and commitment to the three ISO, which is ISO 40001, ISO 9001, and ISO 45001 respectively systems by doing this following. Firstly, accepting responsibility for the system's effectiveness. Secondly, ensure that policies and objectives are established and compatible with the strategic direction and context of organization. Next, ensure that an organization integration, resources, and intended outcomes are all in place. And lastly, encourage continuous improvement. The organizational policy for ISO 40001. The policy of environmental system should appropriate to the purpose and context of the organization, including the nature, scale, and environmental impacts of its activities, products, and service. And then, for ISO 9001, the top management should establish, implement, and maintain a quality policy that help meet the needs of their customers and other stakeholders more effectively. And lastly, for ISO 45001, it includes a commitment to provide safe and healthy working conditions for the prevention of work-related injury, ill health, and appropriate to the purpose, size, and context of the organization to the specific nature of its OH&S risks and opportunities. And then for the next point is responsibilities and authorities for ISO 40001. The top management shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned and communicated within the environmental management system organization. And then the top management also have to ensure that the system conforms to the requirements of the international standard, and workers should report on the performance of the environmental management system, including environmental performance, to top management. And then for ISO 9001, the top management shall ensure that the responsibility and authorities for relevant roles are assigned, communicated, and understood within the organization. And then the top management also have to ensure that the integrity of the quality management system is maintained when changes to the quality management system are planned and implemented. And lastly, for ISO 45001, the top management shall ensure that the responsibility and authorities for relevant roles within the OH&S management system are assigned and communicated at all levels within the organization, and then maintained as documented information. And then the workers at each level of the organization shall assume responsibility for those aspects of OH&S management system over which they have control.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Izzatun Natasha and I will explain about Clause 6, which is planning. Planning is the process for making for something for our action and implementation to achieve the goal. We have two parts for ISO 41000 and ISO 45000, but for 91000 we have three parts, which is 6.1, action to address risks and opportunities. Next, 6.2, environmental objective and planning to achieve them. And for additional part for ISO 91000 is 6.3, which is planning of changes. For 6.1, which is action to address risks and opportunities, for ISO 41001, in general, the organisation shall establish, implement and maintain the processes needed to meet the general environment aspect, compliance obligation and planning action. For ISO 91001, in general, the organisation shall consider the external and internal issue, then determine risks and opportunities that need to be addressed too. For ISO 45001, the organisation shall consider the external and internal issue, requirement of interested party, and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed too. For ISO 40001, it's about the environmental aspect, compliance obligations, and planning action. While for ISO 90001, it's about the organisation should plan the action to address these risks and opportunities, and integrate and implement the action into its QMS, and evaluate the effectiveness of the action. For ISO 45001 is about hazard identification, determination of legal requirement and other requirement, and planning action. Next, for 6.2, which is environmental objective and planning to achieve them. For ISO 41001, the environmental objective should be consistent with the environmental policy. B is measurable, C is monitored, D is communicated, E is updated as appropriate. For ISO 91001, the quality objective should be consistent with the quality policy. B measurable, C take into account applicable, D is be relevant to quality of product and service and enhancement of customer satisfaction. E monitor, F communicated, G is updated as appropriate. For ISO 45001, the OSHA objective should be consistent with the OSHA policy. B measurable, C take into account applicable requirement, the result of the assessment of risks and opportunities, and result of consultation with the worker. D monitor, E communicated, F updated as appropriate. So the last one is 6.3, which is planning of changes, and this could only have for ISO 91001, where in this scope, the organisation should consider the purpose of the changes and their potential consequence, the integrity of the quality management system, the ability of the resource, and the allocation or reallocation of responsibility and authorities. That's all for me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Aisyah Betikul Zulkarnain. So I will continue this presentation with clause 7 and 8. In clause 7, there are five subtopics, which are resources, competence, awareness, communication, documented information. But I will be focused more on competence and awareness. 7.2 Competence. In ISO 14001-2015 EMS, the necessary of person doing work under its control that affect its environmental performance, who are assigned responsibility for the environmental management system, including those who determine and evaluate environmental impact, contribute to the achievement of an environmental objective, respond to emergency situation, perform internal audits, and also perform evaluation of compliance. Meanwhile, in ISO 90001-2015 QMS, the necessary of person doing work under its control that affect the performance and effectiveness of its quality management system, which are training, monitoring, reassignment of currently employed person, and also hiring or contracting of competent person. Meanwhile, in ISO 45001-2050 OHSMS, the necessary of worker that affect or can affect it OHS performance is by identify hazard on the basis of appropriate education, training or experience, and where applicable take action to acquire and maintain the necessary competence, and also evaluate the effectiveness of the action taken. It will also retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. Next is 7.3 Awareness. Awareness in ISO 14001-2015 EMS, the organization shall ensure that persons doing work under the organization control are aware of the environmental policy, the significant environmental aspect and related actual or potential environmental impact associated with their work, contribution to the effectiveness of the environmental management system. Next, awareness of ISO 9001-2015 QMS. The organization shall ensure that persons doing work under the organization control are aware of quality policy, relevant quality objective, and also their contribution to the effectiveness of the quality management system, including the benefit of improved performance. Lastly is ISO 45001-2050 OHSMS. Workers also shall be made aware of the OHS objective and their contribution to the effectiveness of the OHS management system. Next is Clause 8, operation on the 3 ISO, which is ISO 40001, ISO 90001, and 45001. We have two subtopics in this operation of Clause 8. First one is operational planning and control, and the second one is emergency preparedness and response. So, operational planning and control in ISO 40001-2015, the organization shall establish, implement, and also control and maintain the process needed to meet environmental management system requirement and to implement the action identification. The control plan changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effect as necessary. Last one, in ISO 40001-2015, ensure that outsourced processes are controlled or influenced. The next one, ISO 9001-2015, the organization shall plan, implement, and control the processes needed to meet the requirement of QMS for the provision of product, service, and to implement the action. It also to ensure the output of this planning and shall be suitable for the organization operation. Lastly, it will also be control plan changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effect as necessary. In ISO 45001-2015, operational planning and control, the organization shall implement, control, and maintain the processes needed to meet requirement of the OHS management system and to implement the action. Establish, implement, and maintain processes of hazard and reduction of OHS risk using the hierarchy of control. In 8.2, Emergency Preparedness and Response, in ISO 40001-2015, the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the process needed to prepare for any response to potential emergency situation, to maintain documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the process is carried out as planned. In ISO 9001-2015, since this ISO focus more about QMS, quality management system that help organization meet the needs of their customer, hence it has requirement for product and services. Different operation from other ISO, which are communication with customers shall include providing information relating to product and services. Next is to determine the requirement for the product and services to be offered to the customer. The organization shall ensure that it has the ability to meet the requirement for product and services to be offered to customer. They also shall conduct a review before committing to supply product services to a customer. Lastly, ISO 45001-2015, Emergency Preparedness and Response, the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the process needed to prepare for any response to potential emergency situation. It also establishing a planned response to emergency situation, including the provision of first aid and training. Thank you.
Now, I will explain about the Clause 9, which is Performance Evaluation. Under Clause 9, there is 3 sub-clause, which is 9.1, which is monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation, 9.2, internal audit, and 9.3, management review. The first sub-clause is 9.1, which is monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. And there is another 3 subtopics, which is general, evaluation of compliance or customer satisfaction, and analysis and evaluation. Under ISO 14001, the organization must monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate its environmental performance. For ISO 9001, the organization should evaluate the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system. While for ISO 45001, the organization must monitor and measure its activities and operations related to identified hazards, risks, and opportunities, its progress towards achievements of the organization's occupational health and safety objective, and the effectiveness of operational and other controls. While the similarities of these 3 ISOs are, the organization should determine what needs to be monitored and measured, when the monitoring and measuring will be performed, and the method of monitoring, measuring, analysis, and evaluation. Under 9.1.2, for ISO 14001, the organization should establish, implement, and maintain the process needed to evaluate fulfillment of its compliances obligations. For ISO 9001, the organization should monitor customers' perceptions of the degree to which their needs and exceptions have been fulfilled. This is under 9.1.2, which is customer satisfaction. While for ISO 45001, the organization should establish, implement, and maintain process for evaluating compliance with legal requirements and other requirements. Under 9.1.3, it is only applicable for ISO 9001, which is the organization should analyze and evaluate appropriate data and information from the monitoring and measurement. The next subclause under Clause 9 is 9.2, which is the internal audit. For the 3 ISOs, generally the organization must conduct internal audits at planned intervals. They have to check whether the management system is effectively implemented and maintained, and they provide information on whether the management systems conforms to the requirements of their respective ISO, which is ISO 14001, ISO 9001, and ISO 45001. For internal audit program under ISO 40001, the organization shall ensure that the results of the audits are reported to relevant management. For ISO 9001, the organization shall plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program, including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, consultation, planning, requirements, and reporting. For ISO 45001, the organization should ensure that relevant audit results are reported to workers, and where they exist, workers' representatives and other relevant interested parties. Last but not least is the 9.3, which is management review. Under ISO 14001, top management must review the organization's environmental management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. For ISO 9001, the top management of the organization should review the organization's QMS at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, and it should be aligned with the strategic direction of the organization. For ISO 45001, top management must review the organization's OHS management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. For ISO 14001, it includes changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the environmental management system, the extent to which environmental objectives have been achieved. For ISO 9001, it considers information on quality performance and effectiveness, the extent to which quality objectives have been met. And for ISO 45001, it considers the extent to which the OH&S policy and the OH&S objectives have been met.
Lastly, Clause 10, improvement. Improvement is an act or process of improving which will result into something better. Clause 10 consists of 3 parts, which are general, non-conformity and corrective action, and continual improvement. 10.1 General. The requirement is quite similar for all 3 ISOs in this part. The first one, in ISO 14001, it is stated that the organisation shall determine opportunities for improvement and implement necessary action to achieve the intended outcomes for its environmental management system, EMS. In ISO 90001, the organisation shall determine and select opportunities for improvement and implement any necessary action to meet customer requirement and enhance customer satisfaction. In ISO 45001, the organisation shall determine opportunities for improvement and implement necessary action to achieve the intended outcomes of its occupational health and safety management system. The next one, 10.2, non-conformity and corrective action. This subclause is divided into two parts, 10.2.1 and 10.2.2. For ISO 14001 and ISO 9001, the requirement is a bit similar, in which that it is stated that when a non-conformity occurs, the organisation shall react to the non-conformity, then evaluate the need for action to eliminate the causes of the non-conformity, therefore implement any action needed. Whereas in ISO 45001, the requirement is a bit similar to ISO 14001 and ISO 9001, with some additional requirement to it. However, we can see that after the organisation implement the corrective action, they need to review the effectiveness of the action taken. Hence, they need to make changes to their respective management system. In 10.2.2, the requirement is similar for all ISO. The organisation shall retain documented information as evidence of the nature of incident or non-conformities or any subsequent action taken and the result of any action and corrective action, including their effectiveness. Lastly, 10.3, continual improvement. In all ISO, the organisation shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy and effectiveness of their respective management system. In ISO 9001, there is some additional requirement to it, in which the organisation shall consider the result of analysis and evaluation and the outputs from management review to determine if there are needs or opportunities that shall be addressed as part of the continual improvement. That's all from us. Hopefully, everyone can have a better understanding on the differences and similarities between ISO 14001, ISO 9001 and ISO 45001. Thank you for watching.